Rain had been falling over Chicago for hours, turning the city into a watercolor blur of headlights and reflections when I stopped by the 24-hour supermarket near my apartment. I had worked late again another endless day at Voss Media, where I was nothing more than a name on the PR roster, invisible behind the empire of a man who owned everything and trusted no one. I only wanted milk, maybe cereal, something simple to remind me that life could still be ordinary. The aisles were quiet, humming with the sound of fluorescent lights and refrigerators. That was when I saw him, Adrian Voss, the billionaire whose face was on every magazine, whose engagement rumor with a senator's daughter had been trending all week. He was standing alone near the frozen section, no bodyguards, no entourage, just a man, staring blankly at a wall of glass and frost. For a second, I thought it couldn't be him, not here, not at midnight, in sweatpants and a dark coat. But then he turned and I saw those unmistakable eyes, sharp, calculating, yet tired, as if the weight of every headline was carved into them. I froze between the fruit aisle and the freezers, my cart squeaking slightly. He didn't notice me at first. He looked like a man running out of air. Then the light outside flickered and I caught the flash paparazzi. Two of them cameras lifted behind the wet glass doors. Adrian's jaw clenched. His gaze darted toward them and then suddenly to me. Our eyes met, and I swear for a moment he looked almost human, vulnerable. He took 2 steps forward, then 3, until he was close enough that I could smell the rain on his coat. His voice came low, trembling under the hum of the freezers. "Please, just hold my hand. Pretend we're together." I blinked, confused. "What?" Before I could move, he reached for my wrist. His fingers were cold strong but shaking. The camera flash exploded again, white light scattering across the shiny floor. "Be my boyfriend, or lose your job," he whispered. My breath caught. The absurdity of it hit me first, my billionaire boss, the man who could make or end careers, with a single email asking me to play along like some midnight improv. But the look in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't arrogance, it was fear. Real fear. Behind him, the paparazzi pressed closer to the glass doors, voices muffled by the storm. I realized he wasn't threatening me. He was pleading, "Adrian." I managed my voice unsteady. "What are you?" "Don't look," he murmured quickly, tightening his grip just enough to guide me closer. "Smile, Lila, please." I had seen him command boardrooms with less desperation than this. Somehow my body obeyed before my mind caught up. I slipped my hand into his, my pulse thundering. His palm was cold, but his thumb traced small nervous circles against my skin. A gesture that felt too intimate for someone who barely knew my middle name. Just for a second, he whispered. The cameras flashed again, and I turned my face toward him, trying to remember how to breathe. We must have looked like lovers caught in the quiet of a late-night grocery run. His arm sliding around my waist, my head tilted slightly toward him. The air smelled of coffee detergent and rain drifting in through the automatic doors. His heart was beating fast against my shoulder, or maybe it was mine. "They'll believe it," he said under his breath, almost convincing himself. "They always do." My voice came out in a whisper. "What if someone from the company sees this?" His eyes flicked toward me, then softened. "Then they'll think the story's true." I didn't understand yet what story he meant. The engagement rumors, the political pressure, the facade of perfection that held his empire together. All I knew was that he looked like a man drowning, and I was the only air left in the room. The flashes outside stopped. For a moment, silence returned, heavy and strange. He let out a breath, one that seemed to deflate the armor around him. His hand was still holding mine, his knuckles pale. "You did well," he murmured, barely audible. I swallowed, staring at him. "Are you going to tell me what that was?" He released my hand, slowly. "Later, not here." His gaze dropped to the floor, then lifted again, meeting mine with a kind of unspoken apology. "Thank you," he added the word, sounding foreign on his tongue. I nodded, too stunned to speak. He stepped back, the familiar mask sliding back over his face, and without another word, he turned toward the exit. The automatic doors hissed open, spilling rainlight across the tiles. As he disappeared into the storm, one of the paparazzi shouted something I couldn't hear. I stood there frozen in the hum of refrigeration units, still feeling the ghost of his touch against my skin. My reflection stared back at me from the freezer glass-wide eyes. Trembling hands, a woman who had just stepped into a story she didn't understand. I knew only one thing for certain: whatever had just happened would not stay in this aisle. Not in this city. Not with a man like Adrian Voss. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline, and the lights flickered once more. I exhaled slowly, realizing the milk I came for was still in my basket, warm now from my grip. Somewhere between fear and fascination, I whispered to myself, "What the hell was that?" But deep down beneath the confusion and adrenaline, something else stirred. Something dangerously close to curiosity. By morning, Chicago was already awake with noise and headlines. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped off the train and saw my reflection on a stranger's phone screen. A headline glared from it like a warning flare: "Billionaire Adrian Voss spotted with mystery partner in midnight supermarket." My stomach sank. The photo, grainy but unmistakable, showed me my hand in his frozen mid-step beneath the supermarket lights. I looked like someone caught in a secret she didn't even know she had. At Voss Media, the office buzzed louder than the espresso machines. People whispered as I walked past. "That's her," someone murmured near the elevator. "The PR girl from level 10. I kept my head down, clutching my ID like it could shield me. When the email from HR arrived before noon, I already knew who had summoned me. The subject line read simply, "Executive Office, Immediate." The elevator ride to the top felt longer than usual. Each floor beeped like a countdown. When the doors opened, the silence on the executive level hit me like a wall carpet, thick, air-cold everything, expensive and sterile. Adrian's assistant, a woman in a navy suit, looked up from her desk with the expression of someone told not to ask questions. "He's expecting you," she said. His office was vast, all glass and skyline. He stood by the window, suit, sharp demeanor restored, as if last night had never happened. Only his eyes betrayed a shadow of fatigue. "Sit," he said, not looking at me. I sat. The city sprawled behind him, rain still misting the glass. "You've seen the news," he said finally. I nodded. I didn't say anything to anyone. "You don't need to explain," he interrupted. "The media's already decided who you are. Might as well make it official." I blinked. "Official?" He turned to me, then calm and deliberate hands in his pockets. "For the next month, you'll act as my partner. Publicly. It's damage control." The narrative shifts from scandal to stability. My brain stuttered. "Partner, you mean girlfriend?" "Call it what you like," he said. "The optics are what matter." I stared at him, disbelief warring with anger. "You're serious completely." I laughed once, sharp and nervous. "You dragged me into this without asking, And now you want me to pretend to be your girlfriend." His expression didn't change. "You work in PR, Miss Carter. You understand the cost of bad press. If this story spirals, the board will tear me apart. And you," he paused, eyes flicking to me, "you'll lose your job anyway. They'll say you seduced your boss for attention. The internet always picks a villain." His words sank like stones. He wasn't threatening me, he was warning me. "So this is my choice," I said quietly. "Play along or be destroyed by the narrative. I prefer to think of it as mutual survival." He moved behind his desk, tapping a folder. "Legal's drafting a non-disclosure and a temporary contract. You'll have compensation, of course." I stood. "You can't buy my dignity." His gaze sharpened. "No, but you can choose to protect it." I wanted to argue, to throw something, but the truth was colder than pride. He was right. The internet would eat me alive before I even had a chance to defend myself. By the time I reached the lobby again, my phone was vibrating with messages from coworkers and distant relatives who never called. My picture was everywhere, cropped, filtered, captioned with wild speculation. In one meme, I was labeled the supermarket seductress. I wanted to disappear. That afternoon, HR called me in. The manager, a kind woman named Ruth, looked apologetic. "Lila, honey, you're in a difficult position. If you decline the media control contract, it could be seen as non-compliance with crisis management." "Non-compliance," I repeated bitterly, meaning what she sighed, meaning termination. The word burned. By 5 o'clock, I was back in Adrian's office, signing a stack of papers I barely read. The legal jargon blurred together: confidentiality, public appearances, image rights termination clause. When I finished, he extended his hand. "Welcome to the performance." I didn't shake it. "I'm not an actress." "No," he said almost gently. "You're the only one who looked real in that photo." That night, as I walked home under the drizzle, my reflection followed me in every shop window, a girl who wasn't sure if she'd just saved her career or sold her soul. The city around me pulsed with screens, headlines, and voices. Somewhere above it all, in a penthouse of glass, Adrian Voss was probably drafting our next move. I told myself this was temporary, a professional arrangement, a month of pretending. But the whisper from last night still echoed through me, soft and haunting. "Be my boyfriend, or lose your job." Now it wasn't just a whisper, it was my reality. The first day of pretending began like any other Monday, except my inbox was filled with urgent emails about image training and PR coaching sessions. Apparently, when your boss becomes your fake boyfriend, there's an entire department ready to script your affection. I sat in a glass meeting room with 2 media strategists explaining how to hold Adrian's hand in public. "Relaxed fingers communicate trust," one said. "Don't grip too tightly, or it'll look forced." Another added, "Eye contact must be warm but professional, like a Hallmark couple, not a reality TV scandal." I stared at them, wondering if this was my life now. When Adrian entered the room, the air shifted. Even in a simple black shirt and rolled sleeves, he carried the kind of energy that made people straighten in their seats. That'll be all he told the strategists. They vanished like smoke. He turned to me. "You look uncomfortable." I said. "I didn't sign up to be a puppet." His lips curved faintly. "You signed up to survive." There was no malice in it, just honesty. "This won't last forever, Lila. 1 month, then you can go back to being invisible." "Maybe I prefer invisible," I said quietly. "No one ever really does," he replied. Over the next week, I learned how to play the part. The contract required 3 public appearances. coffee runs a charity luncheon, and one dinner with investors. Every movement mattered. The way he touched my back, the way I smiled up at him, the pauses between our laughter. The camera loved him, and somehow it began to love us. Online, the narrative shifted. Maybe Adrienne Voss isn't the cold CEO we thought. Mystery woman humanizes billionaire. The internet, fickle and hungry, started to believe the lie. But inside the lie, something strange began to grow. Between photo shoots and meetings, I saw glimpses of him that didn't fit the headlines. Once I found him alone in the PR office, after hours tie undone, staring at a video of his late father giving a keynote speech. He didn't notice me until the screen flickered to black. He used to say, "The camera never lies," Adrienne murmured. His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. But it does, doesn't it? It shows the version you want the world to believe. I hesitated in the doorway. What version do you want them to see now? He looked at me, and for a second the armor cracked. One that still has something worth believing in. After that night, I started to notice how he watched people, not with suspicion, but with longing, as if studying what being normal felt like. He never ate in public, always working through lunch. So one afternoon, I dropped by his office with 2 sandwiches and 2 coffees. He looked at me like I'd handed him something rare. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know," I replied, "but you'll work better if you eat." He smirked, the expression faint but real. "You sound like my mother." "I'll take that as a compliment." He took a bite, paused, and said, "It is." The silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was fragile, almost intimate. That's how it started, those small moments between the act and the truth. During photo shoots, he'd whisper jokes no one else could hear. On stage at the charity luncheon, his hand would linger on mine a beat too long. Once, after a long day, he offered to drive me home. I tried to decline, but he insisted. When the car stopped outside my building, I thanked him, expecting a polite goodbye. Instead, he said, "Do you ever wish you could start over?" I blinked. "Start what over?" Everything, he said. Life, choices, the person people think you are. His voice carried something heavy, like regret, wrapped in exhaustion. I didn't know what to say, so I just asked, "Would you change it if you could?" He looked out at the rain. I'd change how I stopped trusting people. That's the part that killed everything else. I wanted to tell him he could still learn, but the words caught in my throat. We sat in silence until the wipers stopped. The next morning, our faces were on a magazine cover. The headline read, "Adrienne Voss finds love in the ordinary." My coworkers passed it around the office, laughing, analyzing, gossiping. But behind every whisper, I saw envy. In their eyes, I had become part of his world, an illusion of power I never wanted. By the 3rd week, the line between pretending and feeling blurred. During an interview, a reporter asked how we met. Adrienne smiled smoothly. She was the only person in the room who didn't want anything from me. The crowd laughed softly, charmed. My chest tightened because it didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded true. Afterward, I asked him, "Was that line in the script?" He shook his head. "No, I don't script honesty." So was it honesty or performance? He looked at me for a long time before saying, "Does it matter? It should have mattered," but I didn't have an answer. That night when I got home, my neighbor stopped me in the hallway. "You look different," she said. "Happier." I smiled politely, but inside I wondered if happiness could exist inside something built on pretense. In the mirror, I caught a reflection that wasn't just mine anymore. It was ours. The next day, the PR team scheduled our biggest appearance yet, the annual Voss Media Gala. Cameras, donors, investors, the works. I could already feel the tension humming between us, something unspoken, fragile, and dangerous. The pretending was starting to feel real, and that was exactly what made it dangerous. The night of the gala arrived like a storm disguised in silk and champagne. The hotel ballroom glowed under crystal chandeliers, every inch of it curated to reflect power, wealth, and control. PR teams flitted between journalists, photographers, and guests dressed in the kind of confidence only money could buy. I stood near the entrance, my breath shallow against the soft emerald fabric of the gown they'd chosen for me. The stylist had said the color would complement Adrian's presence, whatever that meant. When he appeared at the top of the marble staircase, the room shifted. Conversations dulled, cameras tilted, and for a brief moment I forgot that all of this was pretend. Adrian Voss was every headline. Come to life, tall, composed, sharp, in a midnight suit, but there was something different tonight. His mask was flawless, yet his eyes were searching for something, or maybe someone. When he spotted me, that was when the air changed. He descended slowly, each step, deliberate, his gaze never leaving mine. You look, he paused as he reached me, voice low enough for only me to hear. Real. That's the idea, I said, forcing a smile. Pretend, remember. His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile, but something softer. Night, pretend beautifully. The cameras started flashing before I could answer. He offered his arm and I took it, my fingers resting lightly on the fabric of his sleeve. Together we stepped into the storm of light. Every flash was a reminder of why we were there, yet every step closer to him felt like a betrayal of reason. His hand stayed warm on my back, steady grounding like a secret only the two of us understood. The evening unfolded in rehearsed perfection. Greetings, toasts, small talk with investors who complimented our chemistry. I played my part, smiling when he smiled, laughing on cue, but each time our eyes met, it didn't feel like performance. It felt like falling into something that wasn't supposed to exist. After an hour, the music shifted to something slower, strings sweeping across the air. Adrian leaned closer, whispering, "Just dance with me. Pretend it's real for a moment." I hesitated, then nodded. He guided me to the dance floor, one hand at my waist, the other holding mine with practiced ease. The rhythm was gentle, but the tension beneath it wasn't. As we moved, the noise around us faded until it felt like we were the only two people in the room. "You're shaking," he murmured. "So are you," I whispered back. His laugh was quiet, a rare human sound. For the first time, his expression wasn't rehearsed, it was vulnerable. "You know," he said softly, "I used to think being admired was the same as being loved. And now I asked." His gaze lingered on mine, the edges of his composure slipping. "Now I'm not so sure I've ever had either." I wanted to tell him that admiration had nothing to do with love, that loneliness could hide behind the flash of every camera, but the words caught somewhere between my heart and my mouth. Instead, I just said, "For what it's worth, you look less lonely tonight." He looked down at me, then eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. "That's because you're here." The song ended, applause followed, but neither of us moved right away. His hand stayed at my waist, the world blurring into gold and noise around us. Only when the next song began did he step back, his breath unsteady. "Let's get some air," he said. Outside the city, lights shimmered against the glass terrace. The noise of the gala dimmed to a distant hum. I leaned against the railing, the cool air biting my skin. "You did well tonight," he said quietly, behind me. "We did well," I corrected. "That's teamwork." He smiled faintly. I forgot what that felt like, being on a team, being seen. I turned to him, but his expression was unreadable. Eyes on the skyline. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was fragile. Then he said almost to himself, "For the first time in years, I didn't feel watched." His voice cracked slightly, and something inside me did too. "That's ironic," I said softly, "considering how many cameras followed you in there." "I wasn't talking about them," he replied. I didn't know what he meant until he looked at me, really looked at me, like I was the only unguarded space left in his world. And in that second, the pretending shattered. His hand brushed mine fingers tentative. The air between us hummed heavy, with all the things we hadn't said. Adrian, I whispered, unsure if it was a warning or a plea. "Don't," he said quietly. "Just don't think." His touch was cautious, as if asking permission he didn't have words for. I didn't pull away. When his lips found mine, it wasn't cinematic or planned. It was quiet, real, almost accidental, like two broken truths colliding in the dark. The kiss was brief, but it left the air trembling around us. When he pulled back, his breath was unsteady. "That wasn't part of the act," I said. "I know." The way he said it scared me because it sounded like surrender. For a long time we stood in silence, the city glittering below, both of us pretending not to feel the shift that had just changed everything. Later, as I watched him return to the ballroom to play the role of the untouchable CEO, once more I realized I'd crossed a line that no contract could protect me from. And the worst part wasn't that I'd broken the rules. It was that deep down I didn't regret it. The morning after the gala, my phone started vibrating before sunrise. At first, I ignored it half asleep and still tangled in the warmth of dreams I couldn't admit I'd had. But the messages kept coming, calls, alerts, notifications, stacking like an avalanche. When I finally opened one, the breath left my body. There we were, Adrian and I on the terrace, under the city lights, his hand on my face, his lips inches from mine. The video was shaky, but clear enough, the kind of footage only a tabloid would pay thousands for. The caption burned through the screen, "Voss caught kissing." Employee scandal behind the Billionaire's gala. Within hours, the story exploded. My name trended across Twitter Reddit threads. Dissected my life strangers dug up my college photos, and someone even found my mother's Facebook. Headlines multiplied like wildfire: the PR girl and the power play, Juck Your Boss affair, the fall of Adrian Voss. I sat frozen in my apartment, coffee untouched, heart pounding. My reflection in the dark laptop screen looked like a stranger, someone naive enough to believe a billionaire could be human. The phone rang again. It was Ruth from HR. Her voice was soft but urgent. "Lila, you need to come in. The board's holding an emergency meeting." "Is this about—" "Yes," she said. "Just be careful what you say." The elevator ride up felt different this time. Every ding sounded like judgment. When I stepped out, whispers rippled through the corridor. My coworkers didn't even try to hide their curiosity. At the end of the hall, Adrian's office door was closed, blinds drawn. I wanted to see him, to ask what was happening, but before I could, two men in suits gestured me toward the conference room. Inside, the board members sat around a long glass table, faces tight with the kind of anger reserved for lost money. The head of PR cleared her throat. "Miss Carter, it appears footage from last night's gala has gone viral. Can you confirm whether this relationship is genuine?" "It's not," I said too quickly. It was part of a media strategy to stabilize the company's image after false engagement rumors. And who authorized that strategy? One of the men asked. Mr. Voss did, I replied. The silence that followed felt like a verdict. Another man spoke. Then we have a potential ethics violation, workplace misconduct, abuse of authority. I shook my head. It wasn't like that. He didn't. Miss Carter, the head of HR, interrupted. Regardless of intent, this situation has put the company at legal and reputational risk. We'll be conducting an internal review. You're on temporary suspension pending investigation. I stared at her words dissolving. You're suspending me? For your protection, she said, but her eyes didn't match her tone. I gathered my things in silence, the weight of every glance following me out. Outside the glass doors, flashes exploded, paparazzi reporters shouting my name. Lila. Is it true? Did you sleep with your boss? Are you pregnant? My chest tightened as microphones crowded near my face. Then suddenly a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Step back. Adrian's security pushed through the crowd, and there he was. Adrian's sleeves rolled up, fury barely contained. He took my arm, gently shielding me, as we pushed through the cameras to his car. Inside, the silence was deafening. You shouldn't have come down here, I said. They'll twist this even more. They already have, he replied. His jaw was tight, eyes dark. The video was edited. They spliced it to look like I initiated everything. Didn't you? I asked before. I could stop myself. He flinched. Not like that. He rubbed his temples. Someone leaked it from inside. Probably Mark or one of the investors, trying to push me out. Push you out. He exhaled. The board wants me to step back temporarily. They said my silence might calm the market. And you're agreeing to that? I asked. He looked at me, and for the first time since I'd met him, I saw uncertainty crack through the perfection. If I fight, they'll dig deeper. They'll drag you down with me. I shook my head. You're letting them ruin you. No, he said softly. I'm letting them believe they can. That night, the company released a statement. Voss Media denies allegations of misconduct. CEO temporarily stepping aside to cooperate with review. Every outlet ran it, with a freeze frame of our faces, like characters in a scandal we didn't write. My apartment became a cage. I turned off my phone, deleted my socials, avoided Windows. Outside, the internet argued about me, some calling me a victim, others a manipulator. The world was loud, but inside me there was only static. Then came the worst part, the silence from Adrian. For 3 days, nothing. No calls, no messages, just headlines and silence. On the 4th day, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a small black envelope with the Voss Media seal. One line in his handwriting, trust me. Don't speak to anyone. My heart twisted. Trust was the only thing I had left, and it felt like the most dangerous choice of all. Later that week, I watched the press conference on TV. Adrian stood behind a podium, composed as ever, his voice even. I will not comment on personal matters, he said, but I will say this: people are quick to judge what they don't understand. Some truths don't belong to headlines. Reporters shouted questions, but he didn't answer. He stepped away, leaving the cameras hungry for more. The feed cut, but the message lingered. He wasn't defending himself. He was protecting me. The realization hurt more than betrayal ever could. That night, I sat alone in the dark, the rain whispering against my window, and understood that our pretend love story had become the most real thing either of us had ever had. And just like that, it was being torn apart by the world. The week after the press conference felt like an endless blur of static headlines and half-remembered dreams. My world shrank to the walls of my small apartment on the south side, where the blinds stayed closed and my phone stayed off. The silence should have been comforting, but it wasn't. It felt like a punishment. My inbox overflowed with messages from strangers, some cruel, some curious, a few pretending to care. My landlord hinted about the news my mother left voicemails I couldn't bear to hear, and the only person I wanted to call was the one who'd vanished into silence. I tried to hold on to rationality, telling myself this was temporary, that Adrian was doing what he said he would, protecting me. But days bled into nights, and every hour without a word from him stretched like a wound. When HR finally called, it wasn't to offer comfort. "Lila, the internal investigation is still ongoing," Ruth said gently. "But your role has been made redundant during the restructuring." I swallowed hard. "You're firing me. It's not personal." "Everything about this is personal," I whispered. But she'd already moved on to formalities. Severance packages, legal disclaimers. I barely heard her. When the call ended, the reality hit. I had lost my job, my reputation, and the one person who'd made me feel seen, all in the same month. I found work where I could copywriting for small businesses, remote gigs that paid enough for groceries. I stopped checking the news, though sometimes headlines still found me. Through the cracks, Voss in hiding, former CEO refuses interviews. The billionaire who fell for the wrong girl. The city kept moving without me. On cold mornings, I'd walk to the corner laundromat with a bag of clothes waiting in line with people who didn't care who I used to be. They were too busy surviving. The rhythmic hum of dryers became my background music, my therapy. Once I saw a magazine on the counter with Adrian's face on it, a blurred shot of him walking through an airport expression unreadable. The headline said, "Where is Adrian Voss now?" I wanted to tear the page out, but I just turned it face down and left. At night, I'd make tea and sit by the window, staring at the rain, sliding down the glass. Sometimes I'd imagine him, somewhere far away, doing the same thing. I wondered if he missed me, or if I'd been just another casualty in his war with the world. I wrote him once, just one email, short and raw. "You taught me how to pretend. Now I'm learning to live without pretending." I never hit send. I kept it in my drafts, reading it every few nights like a prayer I couldn't release. People think heartbreak is loud, full of shouting and tears, but mine was quiet. It existed in the spaces between normal moments, the empty grocery cart, the unreturned call, the second cup of coffee, left untouched because I still made two out of habit. There were days I thought about moving away, starting over somewhere. Nobody knew my name, but something held me in place. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was the stubborn belief that he'd come back even if it was just to explain why he had to disappear. One evening, while scrolling through freelance listings, a news alert popped up on my laptop. I almost ignored it until I saw his name. Voss Media finalizes leadership transition. Adrian Voss to sell majority stake. My heart clenched. He'd actually done it. He was walking away from everything he'd built. For a moment, the room tilted, memories flashing like snapshots. The gala lights, his voice whispering, "Just pretend," the way his eyes softened when he said he didn't feel watched. I closed the laptop, pressing my palms against my face, and let myself cry for the first time since it all began. It wasn't the glamorous heartbreak people write about. It was the kind that leaves you hollow aching and painfully alive. Days later, I packed away everything that reminded me of him: the dress from the gala, the press badges, the signed NDA. But no matter how much I tried to erase him, the city still carried his shadow. Every billboard, every polished glass building downtown whispered his name. On the last night of that month, I walked past the supermarket, the one where it had all started. The fluorescent lights flickered against the rain-soaked pavement. I stood there for a long time, staring through the glass at the freezer aisle. Somewhere deep inside, I still felt the echo of his voice. Be my boyfriend, or lose your job. It should have felt like the beginning of a nightmare. Instead, it felt like the end of a chapter I hadn't finished reading. I took a deep breath, turned away, and walked home with my hood pulled tight. The rain washing everything but the memory of his touch from my skin. In the quiet of my apartment, I finally whispered aloud what I hadn't dared admit until then. He's gone, I said, but the silence that followed didn't answer back. 3 weeks had passed since I last saw his name in the news, and in the strange quiet that followed, life became an echo chamber of ordinary things that no longer felt ordinary. I went to work at a small local agency that didn't care about my past, came home to the same fading walls, and tried to pretend that I was healed. But healing isn't the absence of pain, it's learning how to live with it when the world stops watching. One cold Thursday morning, as I waited for my coffee at the corner cafe, the TV above the counter caught my eye. It was a live business segment, and the anchor's voice was too casual for the words she was saying. Breaking news: former Voss Media CEO Adrian Voss has officially resigned from all board positions. Sources confirm he refused the board's demand to terminate an employee involved in last month's scandal. He's since sold his shares and withdrawn from public life. The room went blurry. My cup slipped from my hand, coffee splashing across the floor. The barista said something, but I couldn't hear. The world had narrowed to the sound of that one sentence echoing in my mind. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd sacrificed everything to protect me. My legs moved before I realized what I was doing. I left the cafe, ran through the drizzle toward the high-rise, where Voss Media's name still gleamed faintly on the glass, though soon it would be someone else's. The lobby security guard recognized me. "Miss Carter," he said softly, pity in his tone. "He's not here anymore. I just need to see his office," I managed to say. He hesitated, then nodded maybe, because he saw something desperate in my face. The elevator ride felt endless, and when the doors opened, the air on the 72nd floor was different, emptier, quieter, like a ghost had just left. The office door was unlocked. Inside, everything was gone, except the faint smell of cedar and coffee. The desk was bare, except for a single folded note. My name was written on it in his handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The message was simple: "Thank you for making me feel human again." I sank into the chair, clutching the note, as if it could fill the hollow that had lived inside me since the night he disappeared. My chest hurt with a mix of grief and something dangerously close to hope. For so long I'd believed he was a man, defined by power and control. But maybe that was never who he truly was. Maybe he'd spent his whole life trying to remember what it felt like to be seen beyond the headlines. I thought about the night at the gala, the tremor in his voice, when he said he didn't feel watched, the way he looked at me, like I was the only thing that made sense in a world built on lies. And now he'd given all of it up: his company, his reputation, his empire, just so I could have my life back. The injustice of it pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. The world had painted him as a villain, but I knew better. He was the man who had whispered for help in a supermarket aisle and asked me to hold his hand because he couldn't face the world alone. I left the building in a haze, the note still in my hand, the city around me a blur of glass and rain. I wandered for hours, ending up near the river, where the wind carried the scent of wet concrete and cold metal. I sat on a bench, staring at the skyline he no longer ruled, and wondered where he'd gone. Paris, New York. Some quiet island where no one knew his name. Wherever he was, I hoped he'd finally found peace. That night, I reread the note under the dim light of my apartment and noticed something I hadn't before: a faint watermark beneath the signature. A logo from a hotel I recognized, the same one where the gala had been held. I didn't know what it meant, but it was enough to keep me awake until dawn, replaying everything that had led us here. Every smile that had been real, every word he hadn't said. I realized then that love doesn't always arrive wrapped in promises. Sometimes it comes in the form of quiet sacrifices no one else will ever see. And maybe that was what he'd been trying to tell me all along, that control isn't strength, that survival means nothing without connection, and that even billionaires can break when they finally choose to be human. I pressed the note to my heart, whispering into the silence, "You didn't lose everything, Adrian. You found what matters." Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars, and for the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me. The grief didn't fade, but it softened. Maybe the truth behind his silence wasn't about endings at all. Maybe it was about beginning again, somewhere, somehow, when both of us were ready to stop pretending. The city had already begun to thaw when I saw him again. Spring had a way of making Chicago look softer, like forgiveness draped over steel. It had been almost 2 months since I found that note in his office, and in that time I'd built a fragile kind of peace. I worked at a local community firm, small but honest, surrounded by people who measured success in hours of rest instead of zeros on a paycheck. I told myself I'd moved on, but every night when I walked home from work, I still passed the supermarket, the same one where it all began. The same aisle, the same humming freezers, the same place where my world had tilted. I don't know why I went inside that night. Maybe out of habit, maybe out of hope. The aisles were quiet, filled with the low buzz of fluorescent light and the faint scent of oranges. I reached for a bottle of wine, something cheap, something ordinary, when a voice behind me said softly, "You still pick Merlot over Cabernet." My hand froze. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. That voice, calm and low, lived somewhere in the back of my memory. Wrapped around words that had once changed everything, I turned slowly, afraid he might disappear if I moved too fast. Adrian stood a few feet away, no suit, no entourage, no armor. Just a man in jeans and a worn gray hoodie, a paper bag in his hand. His hair was longer, his beard rougher, but his eyes, the same storm blue, were exactly as I remembered. "You came back," I whispered. He smiled faintly, that familiar half-smile that used to hide more than it revealed. "I never left. Not really. I just had to remember how to be someone without headlines." My throat tightened. I heard about the resignation, the sale. You gave everything up. Not everything he said. I kept the important parts, like what he took. A slow step closer, eyes steady on mine. the part that still wanted to see you again. The words landed somewhere between apology and confession. For a moment, all I could do was stare at him, trying to reconcile the man from the tabloids with the one standing in front of me, looking at me like I was the only thing that made sense. "You shouldn't be here," I said quietly. "The media stopped caring weeks ago," he interrupted. "They moved on to another scandal. Fame has a short memory, but I don't." I almost laughed, but it came out shaky. "You think you can just walk back into this aisle and pick up where we left off?" "No," he said simply. "I'm not here to pick up anything. I'm here to start over." The honesty in his voice undid me. I wanted to be angry, to remind him of the chaos, the humiliation, the nights. I cried myself to sleep, wondering if he'd ever cared. But the truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired of pretending I didn't miss him. He took another step forward, closing the distance between us. "You once said you were learning to live without pretending," he said. "How's that going?" "Harder than I thought," I admitted. "Good," he said. Because pretending was the only thing that ever kept us apart. His hand lifted hesitant, like he wasn't sure he still had the right to touch me. I didn't move. When his fingers brushed mine, the world seemed to exhale. It wasn't a grand reunion, no cinematic music, no applause. Just two people standing under harsh supermarket lights, trying to find their way back to something that had always been fragile but real. "Be my boyfriend again," he said softly, voice trembling with the ghost of that first night. I blinked, caught between laughter and disbelief. "You mean girlfriend, right?" He smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in months. "No," he said. "You were the strong one all along." The words hit me harder than any declaration of love could have. I laughed, the sound breaking into a sob halfway through. "You really don't make this easy, do you?" "I was never good at easy," he said. "Only real." I reached up, touching his cheek, rough with stubble, warm under my fingertips. "And what happens now?" "Now," he murmured, "now we stop running from what we both knew from the start." He leaned closer, but not to kiss me. His forehead rested against mine, the simplest gesture, yet it said everything we couldn't. "I missed you," I whispered. "Every day." "I know," he said. "I missed you, too." The hum of the refrigerators filled the silence between us. That same mechanical lullaby that had witnessed both our downfall and our beginning. Around us, the world went on cashiers calling out prices, carts rolling by, but none of it touched us. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was part of someone else's story. I felt like I was standing in my own. When he finally pulled back, there was something softer in his expression, something that looked a lot like peace. "I'm not the man I was," he said. "I don't have the company. I don't have the control, but I have time. And I want to spend it doing something right for once." Like what I asked, smiling through the tears that had begun to fall. "Like building something real," he said, "with you." I didn't answer right away. I just took his hand again, the way I had that night months ago, when everything started with fear instead of hope. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was saving him. I felt like we were saving each other. Outside, the rain had stopped leaving, the city washed clean under the glow of streetlights. He walked me to the exit, the automatic doors sliding open with a soft hiss. The air smelled like renewal, like the kind of beginning you don't expect but recognize instantly when it finds you. "So what now?" I asked, as we stepped into the quiet night. Adrian glanced at the sky, then back at me, his hand still in mine. "Now we start over," he said. "No titles, no rules, just us." I looked at him and nodded, realizing that for the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't afraid. The aisle that had once trapped us had become our way out. We met again a few days later at a quiet cafe tucked between a bookstore and a florist on the edge of the river district. The kind of place where the world moved slower, where time felt like it was still deciding whether to pass or pause. The rain had returned softer this time, tracing slow lines down the window beside our table. Adrian arrived first, already sitting with 2 cups of coffee. One black one with too much cream, the way I used to take it. He smiled when I sat down, but it wasn't the confident smile of a man used to being photographed. It was small, uncertain, human. "You remembered how I take it," I said, wrapping my hands around the mug. "I tried to forget," he admitted, "but some things don't fade." His voice carried no sadness, only truth. For a moment we sat in silence, the hum of quiet conversation around us, filling the space where our words had once failed. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." I shook my head. "You don't owe me anything." "I do," he insisted. "You got dragged into my chaos. I thought control would protect me, protect us. But all it did was cage everything that mattered. I made choices that hurt you, and I can't undo that." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw how much lighter he seemed now that the world wasn't watching. "You were trying to survive," I said softly. "We both were. You thought control meant safety. I thought pretending meant strength. Turns out both were wrong." His eyes softened. "You always were better at seeing the truth." "No," I said. "I just finally stopped being afraid of it." He leaned back, exhaling. "I used to think I needed to be the man everyone expected. The billionaire, the strategist, the one who never breaks. But the moment I met you, that version of me started falling apart. And for the first time, it didn't feel like failure." I smiled faintly. Falling apart can be the best thing that happens to someone. It makes room for something real. He nodded slowly. "So what do we do with that room now?" "We fill it with better things," I said. "Not lies, not headlines, just small, honest things." We talked for hours about everything we hadn't said, the nights we spent wondering what the other was thinking. The fear of being misunderstood, the guilt of surviving scandal when others would have crumbled. Adrian told me about the weeks after his resignation, how he'd stayed in a small apartment in Portland, waking up every morning without a schedule for the first time in years. It was terrifying, he said. No board meetings, no calls, just silence. I didn't know who I was without the noise. And now I asked, he smiled faintly. Now I'm learning to like the quiet. Turns out it's not silence, it's peace. "You sound almost normal," I teased. "Careful," he said, laughing softly. "I might start liking that." His laughter faded into something more thoughtful. "There's one more thing," he said. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation. Something to help people who've been destroyed by media scandals. Ordinary people who don't have lawyers or PR teams. People like us." I blinked, surprised. "You want to help them rebuild their lives. I want to help them be heard," he said. "To tell their side of the story, because no one ever told ours." His eyes searched mine. "But I can't do it alone. I was hoping you'd run it with me." For a second I couldn't speak. The old me, the one who used to hide behind fear, would have hesitated. But the woman sitting there now, the one who'd lost everything and learned to build again, simply nodded. "Yes," I said. "But this time we do it our way." "Our way," he repeated, and for the first time I heard what that meant. No power imbalance, no pretense, no performance. just two people choosing to build something together. We spent the rest of the afternoon sketching ideas on napkins plans that were more hope than structure. It didn't matter. What mattered was that we were dreaming again, not about fame or redemption, but about purpose. When the rain finally stopped, we walked outside together. The streets glistened, the air smelled like spring, and the light breaking through the clouds painted everything gold. We stopped by the river, watching the water move slowly under the bridge. I used to think love was supposed to be dramatic, I said. Big gestures, grand rescues, but now I think it's quieter than that. Adrian looked at me. Like what? Like showing up, I said. Like listening. Like sitting in silence without needing to fill it. He reached for my hand. Then I guess I finally understand it. We stood there for a long moment, two people who had once been defined by noise, learning how to exist in quiet harmony. As the sun slipped behind the skyline, he whispered, "Thank you for seeing me when I didn't even know who I was." I squeezed his hand. "You made it easy." He smiled at that, the kind of smile that doesn't fade when the cameras turn away. "No," he said softly. "You made it real." The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of wet pavement and tulips from a nearby shop. And I knew this was what healing felt like, not forgetting, but remembering without pain. We walked home together, not needing promises or definitions, just the steady rhythm of footsteps, and the knowledge that we'd both finally come home to ourselves. A year later, the world had forgotten the scandal that once consumed it. But for me, the memory had softened into something almost gentle, like a scar that no longer hurt when touched. Life had changed in small, steady ways. Adrian and I had moved to Portland trading skyscrapers for rain-kissed streets and coffee shops that knew our names. The foundation we built, the Isle Project, had grown faster than we imagined. It started with a single case, a teacher falsely accused by a viral clip, and became a network of volunteers, journalists, and lawyers, helping people reclaim their voices after the internet had stolen them. Every morning, I walked to our office above a bookstore, where sunlight spilled through wide windows, and the smell of roasted beans floated in from downstairs. Some days I'd find Adrian already there, sleeves rolled up, typing with that same intensity that once fueled boardrooms, but now carried warmth instead of control. He had changed, not completely, because people never do, but enough that his silence was no longer armor. It was peace. I had changed too. I no longer introduced myself with my past title or the scandal that once defined me. Now I was simply Lila Carter, co-founder, storyteller, believer in second chances. The city around us moved slower than Chicago ever had, but I liked that. It gave space for breath, for thought, for love, to exist quietly without performance. On a crisp April morning, I sat in our small kitchen with a cup of coffee, while Adrian read through a stack of letters from people we'd helped. "Listen to this," he said, holding one up. "A nurse from Seattle says her hospital reinstated her after our legal team proved the video was fake. She sent us homemade cookies as a thank you." I smiled. So all it took was nearly losing everything to start doing something good. He looked up, meeting my eyes. "Would you change it if you could?" I thought about it for a long moment. "No," I said finally, "because it brought me here." He nodded, setting the letter aside. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes I still think about that night in the supermarket." I laughed. "Which one, the beginning or the redemption?" "Both," he said. "The first because I was terrified, and the second because I wasn't anymore." His words hung in the air like a truth we both already knew. Later that day after work, we closed early to celebrate the Foundation's 1-year anniversary. Instead of a fancy dinner, we chose something ordinary, a trip to the supermarket. It felt fitting somehow. The sky was overcast, and a light drizzle shimmered in the streetlights as we pulled into the parking lot. The same hum of neon signs greeted us, the same automatic doors hissed open, and the same scent of cold air and citrus filled the aisles. It looked almost identical to that night a lifetime ago, except now there was no fear, just memory. Adrian pushed the cart while I walked beside him, both of us laughing at how surreal it felt. "You know," I said, "I used to avoid this place for months. It felt cursed." And now he asked, "Now it feels like where it all began," I said, "like the first draft of the rest of our lives." We wandered through the aisles picking up small things, bread, wine, coffee, the mundane essentials of a life we'd built from pieces of the extraordinary. When we reached the freezer section, Adrian stopped. "Do you remember what you were holding when I first saw you?" I smiled. "A carton of milk." He reached into the fridge, pulled one out, and placed it in the cart. "Then it's tradition." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're ridiculous," maybe he said. But I like the poetry of it. We kept walking until we reached the spot, the exact aisle where he'd first whispered those impossible words. The hum of the freezers filled the quiet, the same rhythm that had once carried our fear and now held our peace. He turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "You know what I realized," he said. "Every truth worth finding starts with a lie we tell ourselves. I told myself I needed control. You told yourself you needed safety. But what we really needed was each other." I stepped closer, my hand brushing his. "And now I don't need anything," he said softly. "I just want to keep choosing this." He looked around the aisle, then back at me, a small smile, tugging at his lips. "I was thinking we could rename the Foundation." "To what, the aisle?" he said simply. "Because this is where we stopped pretending." I felt the warmth rise in my chest. "You still make everything sound cinematic," I teased. "Only because life started feeling that way when you walked in," he replied. I rolled my eyes, but my smile gave me away. "Fine," I said. "The aisle it is." We paid for our groceries and stepped outside where the rain had turned into a fine mist glowing gold under the streetlights. As we walked to the car, a woman passing by recognized him and smiled shyly. "You're Adrian Voss, right? The one who started that project." He nodded, polite but humble. "That's me." "Thank you," she said simply. "You helped my brother." When she walked away, he looked at me with quiet wonder. A year ago, people used to whisper my name like a scandal. Now they say it like a prayer. "That's what redemption looks like," I said. He slipped his arm around my shoulders. "No," he murmured, "that's what love looks like." We drove home with the windows cracked open, letting the sound of rain fill the car. Later in our apartment, we unpacked the groceries together. The wine went on the shelf, the milk in the fridge, and the quiet filled the space between us like music. As he poured 2 glasses, he said, "Do you ever think about what would have happened if that night never happened?" I smiled. "I think we would have found each other anyway. Maybe not in a supermarket, maybe not as CEO and PR girl, but somewhere. Because I think some people are meant to collide, no matter how far apart they start." He reached across the counter, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Then I'm glad I crashed into you." I laughed softly. "You were a disaster, still am," he said, "but at least now it's a beautiful one." We sat together by the window, watching the rain fall in silver threads against the glass. The city glowed below, quiet and alive. I leaned into him, resting my head against his shoulder. "You know," I whispered for the first time, "I'm not afraid of the world seeing us." "That's because we're not pretending anymore," he said. "And if they see us, they'll see the truth." I looked up at him, smiling. "What truth?" He tilted his glass toward mine. "That what began as a lie ended as the only truth that ever mattered." I let the words sink in, feeling the fullness of everything we had endured, the fear, the scandal, the silence, the redemption. And then I realized he was right. The truth wasn't in the headlines or the apologies or the contracts we'd once signed. It was here in this quiet life we'd built out of chaos. It was in the laughter that no one filmed, the mornings we woke up without dread, the ordinary moments that made everything extraordinary. The next morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, I sat by the counter, writing in my journal. I wrote the same line 3 times until it felt like a heartbeat on the page. He didn't save me. We saved each other from the lies we lived in. Later, we walked down to the farmer's market, hand in hand. People smiled, the air smelled of bread and coffee, and somewhere a street musician played a soft tune that sounded like hope. When we got home, Adrian placed a small wooden sign above our kitchen doorway. It read simply, "The Aisle." I looked at him, laughing. "You're really committing to this metaphor, huh?" He kissed my forehead. "It's not a metaphor," he said. "It's our beginning." That night, as we sat together under a blanket, the rain started again. It sounded different now, not like a storm, but like applause. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet, "We made it." And in the dark, I felt his hand find mine, steady and sure. The world outside would keep spinning stories, would keep being told, but ours had already found its ending. Or maybe its beginning, because love, when it's real, doesn't need an audience. It just needs 2 people brave enough to tell the truth. Before you scroll away, take a moment, because if this story stayed with you, even for a second, it means something in you still believes in second chances. Maybe you've loved someone who walked through fire to find themselves again. Maybe you've been the one trying to rebuild from ashes the world told you to hide. Or maybe, like Adrian and Lila, you've learned that love isn't about saving or being saved. It's about seeing and being seen when the lights have gone out. That's what stories like this are for. Not the grand gestures, not the billionaire titles or the headlines, but the quiet truth that even in a world built on appearances, kindness still changes everything. If you felt that if it made you breathe a little slower, smile a little softer, or remember someone you once called home, then this is your moment to give something back. Subscribe to Emma's Stories right now, because this space was built for people who still believe that love, redemption, and humanity matter. Every story here is a hand reaching out in the dark, reminding you that the world can still surprise you, that a stranger's whisper can change a life, and that heartbreak doesn't mean ending it. Often means beginning, and I want you here for the next one. The next tale that will remind you that hope is never foolish, that kindness is never wasted, that love is never out of reach. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, whether it's a small town diner, a city apartment, or a quiet farmhouse where rain sounds like memory. Share what part of the story touched you most. Was it the moment he whispered, "Be my boyfriend," not as a command, but as a cry for connection? Was it when she learned that healing begins The moment you stop pretending? Or was it that final line, the one that said what we're all too scared to admit, that what begins as a lie can sometimes end as the only truth that matters? Because that's what life is, isn't it? A series of mistakes that turn into miracles when we find the courage to face them. So stay, subscribe, share this story with someone who needs to hear that they're not broken beyond repair. Someone who's standing in their own aisle of truth, waiting for the moment to stop pretending and start living again. And if you've ever loved and lost, if you've ever been afraid to be seen, let this be your sign you are enough. You always have been. This is Emma's Stories, where we don't tell fairy tales. We tell the truth wrapped in love, the kind that hurts, heals, and lingers. And somewhere between the first lie and the final truth, we find ourselves again.